The new theater of the mind. The Bruce Collins Show.
Welcome back to the Bruce Collins Show. We're very glad to have you join us. Tonight, we'll climb back through the ring ropes and talk about a wrestling legend and pastor who is the inspiration for the upcoming movie, The Masked Saint. The Masked Saint airs nationwide on January 8th, 2016, in movie theaters across the United States, and it promises to be a great movie. Chris Whaley, known as the Saint in pro wrestling, joins us later in the hour to talk wrestling and the new movie inspired by his life. The Bruce Collins Show airs every Friday night at midnight right here at WWPR 1490 AM. You can listen to past archives of the Bruce Collins Show at IPBN-FM.com. That's IPBN-FM.com. There's a banner just for the Bruce Collins Show on the Intrepid Paradigm Broadcasting Network website. Click on the show banner and you will go right to our page. We would appreciate it if you're able to spread the word for our show by word of mouth, social media, or in whatever creative way you can. Also, we have a Facebook page for the Bruce Collins Show. Please like us there. And you can email the show at bruce_collins_show@AOL.com. We'd love to hear from you. The Bruce Collins Show also has a YouTube channel. Visit YouTube, search for the Bruce Collins Show channel, subscribe, and catch all the latest shows on YouTube. And now let me introduce my co-host, Chad Miles. He's a former congressional candidate in Michigan and a military veteran, and is the founder and webmaster at Conspiria.net. Find out what all the hullabaloo is about at Conspiria.net tonight. You can also find out more information on Chad at ChadMiles.com. He is radio's lethal weapon, Chad the Odometer Miles. Welcome back to the program, Chad.
Hey, thanks for having me back, Bruce.
It's great to have you back, and it's great to have your friend, too. Now, Chad, how have you been?
I've been doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay, but I'm trying to find a piece of paper to write on.
Oh, really? Why do you need a piece of paper?
Well, I need a piece of paper to write on because I need to make out a grocery list.
Okay, what do you need to buy?
Snickers candy bars.
That's it?
Yeah.
You need a piece of paper to remember that you need to buy Snickers bars?
Sure. You don't want me to accidentally buy M&Ms or Skittles, do you?
No, that would be a travesty.
My sentiments exactly.
So you don't have any paper there?
I do have paper.
Oh, I thought you said that you didn't have any paper.
No, I said that I was trying to find a piece to write on.
Okay, I don't get it. Why don't you just use the paper you have?
Because all the paper I have, someone came along and drew lines through it.
That's called lined paper.
How did you know that? Have you been going through my drawers and drawing on my paper?
No, why would I do that?
If I could explain that, I'd be able to explain why you act like a chihuahua on our show.
Hey, Senor Pickles really does talk.
I have a letter from my great-uncle to my grandfather. My great-uncle was Kiefer Collins.
Is Kiefer still with us?
Oh, no, he died at sea. He was the unluckiest guy in the world. He died on an iceberg.
Why do you say he was unlucky?
His last words were, "Oh, look, the Titanic is coming to save us."
I see.
You might have a talking dog, Chad, but I have the smartest pet in the world. I have a parrot.
What does your parrot do?
Well, I'm not sure yet, but he cost me $10,000, so he has to be pretty valuable.
Wait, you spent $10,000 on a bird? I think you were taken to the cleaners.
No, it was the pet store.
How could that bird be worth so much?
Well, let me explain. The other day, I went to the pet store, and the shop owner's assistant, Oswald, took me to the parrot section, and he asked me to choose one. So I asked him, how much is the yellow one? And this assistant to the pet store owner, Oswald, said, $2,000. I was so shocked, Chad. So I asked him why it was so expensive, and the assistant explained, this parrot is a very special one. He knows typewriting and can type really fast. So then I asked Oswald, well, what about the green one? And Oswald said, he costs $5,000 because he knows typewriting and he can answer incoming telephone calls and take notes.
Wow.
So both of those seemed kind of expensive. So I said to Oswald, what about the red one? And Oswald told me, that one's $10,000. So I asked him, what does he do? And Oswald said, I don't know, but the other two call him boss. So that is what I'm doing with a $10,000 bird. It only made sense.
Yeah, well, you know what? I guess P.T. Barnum was right.
Did he have a parrot?
No, but apparently he ran into a lot of $10,000 parrot owners.
Sounds like my kind of guy.
I'm sure he is.
By the way, as most of our listeners know, last month I moved to a city in the mountains near Santa Cruz, California. I've been talking about this every week because there's been a lot of strange things go on. And from day one, the situations have just been getting weirder and weirder while I've been living there. Alone, each incident might not seem weird, but together they are very unusual. For instance, the first week of November when I moved here, I was in the park in the middle of the city. I saw on a Welcome to Clapton Falls sign an unusual logo that was an eyeball with a ray of light coming down from the eyeball. It was strange, but by itself, it might not mean anything. Then a week later, I was visited by 3 people who claimed to be the Clapton Falls Welcoming Committee. When I looked at the pad of paper that the woman was writing on, I saw the same eyeball symbol, and I asked her about it. As soon as I did, the 3 of them got up and left abruptly. Then after that, I was at the hardware store, and I asked the cashier about the welcoming committee. A woman behind me in line said there's no official welcoming committee in Clapton Falls, and the cashier seemed to glare at her. As I left, I realized that the hardware store owner had paid me too much money in change. So when I went back inside, he had his back turned to me, and he was on the phone, and he was saying something like, he was asking about you. Now, when he turned around and saw me, he gave me the most awkward look, and of course I felt funny about it, and I put the dollar down on the little line there, and I said, you paid me too much, and walked out. So then just last week, another unusual event took place. I should say that I still work in the San Jose area, even though I live in Clapton Falls, so I have to drive to work and come back home. In traffic, it takes me about an hour and 15 minutes to 90 minutes to get to work. It pretty much just depends on how heavy the traffic is or if there's any accidents on the road. Well, I was running late last Thursday, so I decided to take a shortcut away from the highway and take this old windy road that will get me to the highway further up the road. Probably about, I'd say about 10 to 12 miles up the road, it merges onto the highway. So there aren't too many people who take this road. At least there weren't that many when I was on it. And I was making pretty good progress. But after a few minutes, I came upon something quite shocking. I would say I had traveled about 20 minutes and was several minutes away from the city limits. The area around me was not populated except for a gas station I had passed a mile back. But as I winded down a mountainous area, I came to a clearing to the left of this 2-lane road. On my left, and to my surprise, was a huge complex. It had a chain fence around it with a guard shack at the entrance. I'd say there were at least 4 large buildings, there could have been 5, within this gated area, and there was enough parking for hundreds of cars, and it appeared that many people must have been in this area because the parking lot was filled. So there must have been a lot of people within the buildings. The capacity for this compound could house probably 4 or 5 times the population of Clapton Falls. That's how big it was. Unbelievably huge. And so it couldn't be possible that it's all the people from this city that are working there. I don't know who is going there and entering this compound, but there's quite a number of people who are parking in this gated parking lot. So my mouth must have been wide open as I passed by these large structures. And here's the most shocking part of all. There was no wording around the building to proclaim the name of a corporation, nothing written anywhere to show that this was an auto plant or a nanotechnology R&D facility or like a computer chip corporation, which is quite frequent in California, especially Silicon Valley. You drive along a road and you hit computer company after computer company after computer company. But there wasn't any name to these buildings. You couldn't tell what it was. There were no markings on the buildings, and the buildings were just plain vanilla square buildings with mirrored windows. But here's the craziest thing of all. Instead of words to describe what this facility was about, there was only a large sign a few feet in front of the guard shack. But no words on that sign, just a symbol. Yeah, the symbol was the eyeball with the ray of light coming down from it. I have to say that when I saw it, I almost lost control of the car. I almost wish I hadn't come across it, because now, admittedly, I'm getting a little bit paranoid about what this symbol means and why I keep running into it. I really have no idea at this point, but now I feel like I have to figure it out. Anyway, I'm sorry to leave people with that serious note, but I want to let people know what's going on. With that in mind, I think we should lighten the mood a little bit and do some news. So, Chad, do you have any news for us this week?
Well, as a matter of fact, I do.
Excellent.
Thailand's last resort rehab, about 100 miles north of Bangkok, resembles a traditional drug detox facility. Work, relaxation, and meditation, etc., except for the vomiting.
Does anybody remember Vomiting Larry?
I was going to say, this is a continuation from last week.
Yeah.
At the Vomit Temple, Buddhist priests, that not to be confused with the band Judas Priest.
That's what I was thinking.
Mix a concoction of 120 herbal ingredients that are nasty, according to the temple's methamphetamine addicts interviewed for a recent Australian TV documentary. Said one of the rehab agenda, vomiting is at 3 p.m. every day. Foreigners must vomit for the first 5 days. The vomiting is intense. And that's a direct quote.
Wow.
And that's from the International Business Times in London.
Do you ever notice we get in this weird vortex where our articles intertwine? We've talked about Buddhists and vomiting lately.
That's right.
It's very weird.
I remember the vomiting thing. I had forgotten about the Buddhist, the embezzler.
Yeah.
That's funny.
So I guess vomiting will help you with your detoxing. It would get rid of, I guess, some of the chemicals in your body.
Yeah, maybe, but they make them ingest this nasty herbal concoction and then they vomit. I don't see the therapeutic value of that.
Yeah, here in the Bay Area, when they talk about drug rehab, they have this beautiful facility in the mountains, and they talk about, you can go there and it's like the Whispering Pines and enjoy it's almost like a vacation, it looks like. Can you imagine this place? Come visit the Buddhist monks at the Bangkok Last Resort Rehab, where you'll vomit your guts out for 5 days. I can't wait.
The vomiting is intense.
Yeah. Now, would the vomiting be intense or in the temple? No, just kidding. Different kind of tense.
Camping rehab. It's intense.
Yeah.
People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, yes, we all know them as PETA, filed a federal lawsuit in California in September on behalf of an endangered crested black macaque, that's a monkey, that wandered up to an unattended camera on a tripod and clicked a selfie.
Again, selfies.
The camera belonged to photographer David Slater, who claimed copyright to the photo even though Naturo, that's the name of the macaque, actually snapped it. The shot might be valuable to Naturo since it had became viral on the internet. Though the photo was taken in Indonesia, Slater's publisher is based in California, and that's from CNN. I've actually seen that picture of the monkey.
Really?
And it's hilarious.
So PETA, which normally is fighting for quote-unquote animal rights, is upset because they want Naturo to get the profits from a selfie that he took, in essence.
Yeah, It's kind of a bizarre lawsuit.
They claim that this monkey has the copyright to his own photo.
Because he clicked the button.
What a weird fight for PETA to be involved in.
Well, they're a bunch of weirdos anyway.
Yeah.
So.
Can you imagine them picketing? Give Naturo his profits.
No justice, no peace.
I'm sure PETA would say, we'll take the profits for Naturo.
Yeah.
And then we'll never hear from Naturo again.
He will disappear down the memory hole.
That's right.
All right, moving on. Jose Banks, now 40, filed a $10 million lawsuit in 2014 against the federal government because jailers at Chicago's high-rise Metropolitan Correctional Center failed to guard him closely. Failed to guard him closely enough.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
This is not on purpose either, but now this one reminds me of the story about the prisoner, the witness who was locked up with the murderer.
Right.
Another jailer story.
This is crazy.
Yeah. And Jose Banks, do you think we could also call him Joseph A. Banks?
Yeah. Can I buy clothes from him?
Yeah.
Can I get 2 suits for free?
Yeah. So they failed to guard him closely enough in 2012.
Thus enabling him to think he could escape.
Wow.
Now listen to this. This is insane. He and a cellmate had rappelled 17 floors with bed sheets. But Banks was rearrested a few days later. Still, he claimed that the escape caused him great trauma. Well, I would think so if you're 17 floors up and you're rappelling with bed sheets.
Bed sheets. You must have watched a lot of movies, huh? Let's repel.
In addition to humiliation and embarrassment and damage to his reputation.
Yeah,
In
like
September,
being in
the
jail
US
wasn't a bad reputation enough.
Well, wouldn't that kind of, isn't that a good reputation? You rappelled 17 floors with bed sheets. I mean, you're kind of brave if you do that.
Right. He could put that on a resume.
Yeah, you could be like a stuntman, or maybe the CIA would have some use for that.
Yeah. The fact that I was in jail isn't making my reputation bad. It's that the jailers let me try to escape.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the U.S. Court of Appeals turned him down and wrote the judges wrote, no one has a personal right to be better guarded. That really points to the litigious society that we have. When
That's
people
why everybody yells
spill
for
coffee
court
on
reform.
themselves or something like that, they sue.
In August, Che Hearn, 25, who police said had just shoplifted electronics items from the Walmart in Round Lake Beach, Illinois.
This is getting crazy because we had a story about a guy who cut himself. Wasn't it at Walmart when he was?
Yeah, he was trying to steal that track phone.
It's like these stories have just repeated themselves.
Oh, Beach, Illinois was picked up while on foot near the store. This is funny. Police found that Hearn had actually driven his car to the Walmart, but that while he was inside shoplifting, a repo agent who had followed him to the store had confiscated it. So he had to get away on foot. Oh, that's from the Lake County News Sun.
Which only proves one thing. When your life is all out of control, it's all out of control. Che Hearn, who was Che repoed and Che arrested.
This person, I think, is embarrassing himself in his old age, to be honest.
Yes, but it's interesting, and this is why he is good to bring on our show as an example, because this is a guy who has been celebrated by the paranormal and UFO community.
Oh, and the New Age community, they all love him.
And they said, well, he's an astronaut, and therefore he has credibility. And I think at first, most of us didn't. In fact, as a matter of fact, years ago, I tried to interview him. And I don't know why it fell through, but this would have been about, I want to say 7 or 8 years ago. And at that time, I don't think his reputation was quite as bad. It's gotten worse in time. But I think the reason why people paraded him around was, of course, because of what he had done. And it only goes to show that just because you have a title and you maybe had some kind of prestige within that, that you're not necessarily an expert on other things, and it doesn't necessarily mean your voice is more credible. But I think in interviewing him with the title that he has, that's what made him credible to talk about this weird stuff.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Let me read this and I'll give you my opinion. Astronaut Edgar Mitchell, that's who we're talking about. He was the 6th man to walk on the moon. He told a reporter in August that, quote, "My own experience talking to people," unquote, "has made it clear that extraterrestrials are trying to, quote, keep us from going to war," unquote, with Russia, and that U.S. military officers have told him that their test missiles are frequently shot down by alien spacecraft. This is from Fox News. Yeah. Now, this is Edgar Mitchell, and he is. I mean, he's walked on the moon.
Yeah.
And I think when he first came on the scene, I think, did he do a Larry King live interview?
Might have, yeah.
He's been around for about 10 years. I mean, like you said, when he first came on the scene, it really got people's attention because he was an astronaut who, number one, he was an astronaut. Number two, he was an astronaut who was actually walked on the moon. That's a very small group of people. So you would think if anybody is on the inside at NASA, it's this guy. Yeah. And he's talking about UFOs are real, disclosure, extraterrestrials, all that. But the more he talks about this, the more, like you said, the more ridiculous he sounds and the less credibility he has. And if you look at what he says here, he's basically, what he's saying is, look, I've talked to people and I have sources who say that extraterrestrials are real. He's not saying, I saw extraterrestrials, yeah. I saw information when I was at NASA, I saw UFOs. He's not saying any of that. Right. He's just kind of going out and being involved with the whole UFO thing. And just because he's an astronaut and he walked on the moon, people 100% embraced him for it.
Yeah.
But he brings nothing to the table as far as the proof of extraterrestrials or UFOs or, anything like that. So like I said before I started to read this man is just, I think he's embarrassing himself the more he talks.
Yeah. It's so easy to say I've talked to U.S. military officers, but no names.
Yeah. Oh, exactly.
And that they're frequently shot down by alien spacecraft. So frequently. You don't think that kind of information would get out there other than by this astronaut, Edgar Mitchell, who is fixated on aliens?
And how many dozens of people would be involved in a test launch of a missile? I mean, probably more than dozens, maybe a couple hundred.
You can't know everything. You can't be the only guy that's getting all of this intel and know everything. Common sense would tell you that doesn't work. So the more Edgar Mitchell speaks, the less believable he is because he can't know all of this stuff. So it just, and for him, it's limelight. So he has to keep in the limelight by creating this stuff.
And he's involved in every goofy UFO thing that comes out.
Yeah.
Like almost everything, like this Roswell slide thing they had a couple of months ago. He was neck deep in that fiasco. If you don't know what that is, just Google it.
Yes, I do. Chad, thank you so much for giving us the news this week.
You're welcome, Bruce, and thanks again for having me back on the show.
And up next, we're going to get in the ring with a grizzled wrestling veteran, an author, a pastor, and the inspiration for a new movie that premieres in theaters on January 8th, The Masked Saint. His name is Chris Whaley, and he joins us in a moment. I'm really excited about a new movie that is coming to theaters on January 8th, 2016. For those of you who are friends with me on Facebook, you know I've been advertising this quite frequently. The movie trailers are on YouTube. Again, the movie is The Masked Saint. The inspiration for The Masked Saint is Chris Whaley. Chris Whaley is an American author, Southern Baptist pastor, and former professional wrestler who competed in Florida using the ring name The Saint. His novel, The Masked Saint, has been turned into a movie. The Masked Saint movie won Best Picture at the 2015 International Christian Film Festival. And as I said before, it will be released nationwide on January 8th, 2016. I'm very excited about that. Chris Whaley, welcome to the Bruce Collins Show.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Now, I know a lot of wrestlers today were not necessarily fans of wrestling. Were you growing up a fan of pro wrestling?
Oh, absolutely. I started watching professional wrestling when I was a kid, and when I could get my dad to take me over. I grew up in Auburndale, Florida, and when I could get my dad to take me over to the Armory in Lakeland, it was just the highlight of my childhood, being able to go over there and see the guys that I watched on TV.
Mm-hmm. My father was not a big fan of wrestling. As a matter of fact, he would try to limit my time because growing up I saw all the different wrestling promotions, and he thought that was a little bit too much. But my grandfather, who was a pastor in the Bay Area, was a big wrestling fan. So when I would go visit him, we would watch roller derby, and then we would watch professional wrestling. And I didn't really take to roller derby, and I think it was because you didn't really get the storylines that you got in professional wrestling and the comparison between good versus evil. And some of my favorite wrestlers were Pat Patterson and Ray the Crippler Stevens when I was really, really young. But who were your favorite wrestlers growing up?
My favorite as a kid, of course, was Eddie Graham.
Mm-hmm.
Loved Eddie Graham, Red Bastien, Dory Funk Jr., of course, I always enjoyed the Mexican wrestler Jose Lothario. He was quite a wrestler. So whoever was on and whoever was a good guy was fine with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, how did you become involved in pro wrestling? How did this opportunity present itself?
I had gone to seminary right out of college. We went to Southern Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky, and I was just sick the whole time, physically sick the whole time I was there. And we came back after one semester, and I was really into the weights, and I was in really good shape. And for the first time in my life, I had more time on my hand than I was used to. And my wife was teaching high school math at her alma mater in Plant City. And one day I was reading the Tampa Tribune, and there was there was an ad saying wanted professional wrestlers, and I showed it to my wife, and of course she rolled her eyes. She wasn't too thrilled with it, but I drove over and walked in, and there was the great Malenko.
Wow.
He was a bad guy when I was growing up, but he was just a great guy. He has two sons that were both exceptional wrestlers, Dean and Joe. Mm-hmm. And I learned everything I could from him. He was a great guy, great teacher, and that was how I got my start back in 1978.
And people may not realize it, but the training is very rigorous, isn't it?
It is very, very rigorous. I would hate to get in the ring if I had put the time into learning everything that I possibly could about wrestling. So when I started, when I had my first match, was about 6 months. But today, there are guys literally that go in for a month and get in the ring. Of course, they don't look that good, but things have changed a lot. Things have changed a lot since I was in wrestling back in the 70s.
Yes, absolutely. You know, a lot of people explain wrestling as choreographed, and I bet you just winced right now when I said that. Can you explain?
Absolutely.
Can you explain how a wrestling match works?
You know, the business was very, very protective when I was growing up. You know, when wrestling first got started, it was legitimate. Whoever won the match. And there's a guy named Gorgeous George that changed everything. He started letting his hair grow out. He, you know, bleached his hair blonde, had a valet, started wearing some unbelievable outfits, and people could not believe what they saw, and the arena started filling up. And so it went from legitimate to, okay, it's going to be legitimate, but we're going to have some good showmanship while we're in the ring. And so the guy who was supposed to win would win, but they would have some great showmanship. And then it went to whoever, you know, the promoter wanted to put over. So you go to the arena, you go into the dressing room, the promoter comes in, and whoever you're working against, he says, I want you to go 20 minutes or 30 minutes, and you're going to put him over, or he's going to put you over, and use your finish hold, and or work the crowd, and that's it. Mm-hmm. But you don't choreograph anything. There was
right.
A lot of times I didn't even know the guy that I was working against until I got to the arena that night, and so you don't you don't have time to choreograph anything.
Now, I have heard nowadays, which sounds unbelievable, but they practice some of the match beforehand. How would that work if you're trying to read what the audience wants?
You know, I got out of wrestling in 1988. That was about the time that Vince McMahon was making the WWF into a national and international business. In the old days, you had 26 territories all over the United States. Mm-hmm. Florida was a big territory. And Texas had 3 territories. You had the Funks in West Texas, and the Von Erichs in East Texas, and then Putski down in South Texas. And so McMahon inherited the WWF from his dad, and he was a marketing genius, and he turned a little fledgling territory into $1 billion business. And when he did that, it changed everything. Shut the territories down. And then all of the big talent, of course, migrated to the WWF, and you cannot compete, you know, with national TV, with local TV. You just can't compete. So it put the territories out of business. So Vince, being the unbelievable marketer he is, changed the face of wrestling forever. So I don't know what they're doing these days. Matter of fact, I don't even watch WWE. I just don't have the stomach for it.
Yeah.
So I don't know what they're doing these days, but I do know that there's some guys trying to bring back wrestling as it used to be. Jeff Jarrett has started up what's called Global Force Wrestling, and he is really doing a great job of bringing back the old wrestling. So I hope he succeeds, and it's going to be rough competing against Vince, but if anybody can do it, Jeff can do it.
Yeah. Well, as you said, I think a lot of wrestling fans are looking for the old style, especially those of us that have that perspective. Some people don't remember what it was like before, you know, Vince broke kayfabe and before it became more of an exhibition of moves rather than a story. There was wrestlers used to sell. They would slow, the matches were slower back then, but there was a lot more intensity. There was a lot more drama. I remember guys that would be in bear hugs for 5 minutes and the crowd would be going crazy, and the babyface would get out of the bear hug and everybody would be, yeah, yay, and then the heel would get him back in the bear hug. And so it would start all over again, and they really could work the crowd. The crowd would get into it. My grandfather, who was a pastor, on Saturday mornings, I remember there would be a heel tag team and a babyface tag team, and the heel wrestler that was in the ring would distract the referee. The heel outside of the ring would take the babyface and start beating him up in the corner, and my grandfather would yell at the referee to turn around. I mean, that's how much the fans really bought into and were entertained and brought into the storyline by this wrestling. It was so effective back then.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Those were the good old days, man. I loved it. I can remember one of my last matches was in Mississippi. I wrestled my last 3 years when I was in seminary in Fort Worth, Texas, and was wrestling for WCCW, and I was wrestling the first black world heavyweight champion, Iceman King Parsons.
Right.
That match was just like you were saying there, where you're working for several minutes, and and then I make a comeback, and just the crowd erupts.
Mm-hmm.
Just the whole type of matches are so drastically different today. I mean, it's almost like a movie drama today, rather than guys working in a ring.
Yeah, and it's not believable. The amount of pummeling that the person takes in a short amount of time, and they're not selling anything. It's really it's really sad. Now, you wrestled as the Saint, of course. Can you describe who the Saint was? In your mind, was there a theme about the Saint? Was he a baby face?
Oh, yeah, he was a baby face. I was actually a youth minister at a large county seat church, and my wife was pregnant with our first child, and I went to the pastor and said, I could wrestle a couple of nights, and it would really help our family because my wife's pregnant, and I really wasn't making much money as a youth minister. And he said, we're not going to make our church into a circus, no way. And so I was kind of dejected, but I got the idea of working under a hood. That way nobody knew who I was, so I could wrestle a couple nights a week. So that's how the Saint was born. I put on a white mask, white trunks, white boots, white cape, the perennial babyface good guy, and that was how it happened. And that's the way I finished until I retired in 1988.
Mm-hmm. And did you grow up in a Christian environment?
Actually, I did not. My dad was a long-distance truck driver and a fifth-degree redneck. My mom grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, and so I did not have a Christian upbringing. Then my mom was the beginning of the spiritual heritage of my family. Baptist minister was out knocking on doors, and when he knocked on our door, my mom said, I've been praying for somebody like you for a long time. She just had so many questions that she was never allowed to ask, and then that was the day my mom gave her heart to Christ, and everything changed. And from that point on, my home was not the same. My dad became a Christian when I was a teenager, and that was one of the things that convinced me of the reality of God. I said, if God could save that man, he could save anybody. So that's how it happened for me.
Yeah. It's interesting what you were saying about the pastor's reaction, because my grandfather was a huge wrestling fan, but he would have never shared that, to his congregation. There was kind of a stigma about that. Other than that pastor, did you ever experience interesting reactions from other Christians who learned you were a wrestler?
Yeah, but it was always good.
Oh, that's good.
It was always good. When we were in seminary in Fort Worth, from 1985 to 1988, we were a part of a great church there in Fort Worth, and our church just loved it because I would bring, some of the wrestlers that they saw on TV. I'd bring them to church with me, and the people just thought that was, the greatest thing in the world. So I never had a negative reaction, never.
And when you wrestled Iceman Parsons, was that in the famous Sportatorium?
No, I wrestled in the Sportatorium there in Dallas, but no, this was in Mississippi. We were wrestling every night in Mississippi, and so one night I think I wrestled one of the Freebirds, and then Iceman King Parsons one night, and I don't know who the other guys were, but I particularly remember Iceman King Parsons because that was the last concussion that I got.
And I know people will know this name, or they should if they know anything about wrestling in the last 20 years, but you faced The Undertaker in the ring. Of course, he probably was, Mean Mark Callis or something like that?
Yeah, he was, actually I think he was wrestling under the name of Powerhouse then.
Oh, okay.
But he was 23 years old, and he just was unbelievable specimen, 6'8", about 315 pounds, and just built like, a Greek god. And, that was a great night. I had actually already wrestled a match, and, he was in the main event, and, a guy who was supposed to work against him, was not able to make it, because of, travel problems. And so the promoter came in and said, I need somebody to, work again against, Mark. And I said, this guy's going to be a star. So I volunteered, said, yeah, I'd do it. So
yeah,
it was a great night. It really was.
Is it pretty?
He's a great guy to work with.
Is it a God-given thing for a wrestler who has that intangible it factor in wrestling? In other words, you spotted The Undertaker and you said, this guy's going to be big. There are guys in wrestling that, for some reason, you can kind of tell early on, this guy's going to be huge.
Right. I think you're absolutely right, Bruce. He was one of those. Hulk Hogan was one of those. Hulk Hogan was working as a heel in the WWF, and Sylvester Stallone was in a hotel room in New York City and turned wrestling on. And when he saw Hulk Hogan, he said, "I want him in my next movie." And of course, that was Rocky III. And that's really one of the things that put the WWF on top was the publicity from that movie. And Hulk Hogan became a household name after that. So he was one of those guys. I'm just trying to think of some others real quickly, but I'm sure you could name others that you probably thought were going to be a star the first time you saw them. But
yeah, I
those
could.
two still stick out.
For instance, I could tell Jake the Snake was going to be huge. I just, he had a great ability to do promos. He just was a natural. One thing that is very disappointing about WWE, and there's other things we could list, like the way they're doing wrestling now, but back in the late 90s, they decided to create a raunchy product during what they called the Attitude Era, and they blurred the lines between good and evil. But that's not just happening in wrestling. You see, movies where nowadays they had the Green Hornet, and his lifestyle was objectionable, I would say, and the Lone Ranger is not what he used to be. So I think young people need heroes, and they need to know that there's a difference between good and evil. But a lot of things nowadays, it's not that clear, and wrestling has been, unfortunately, one of those things that's abandoned its old principles that made it such a success. And you created a book called The Masked Saint. Can you talk about why you wrote this book?
Yeah, each chapter actually is built upon something real life that happened to me. In the book, the the pastor puts a mask on and goes out at night and kind of becomes a vigilante. I didn't do that part. I didn't put the mask on and go out at night, but I did do what I could to help those who couldn't help themselves.
Mm-hmm.
There was a little lady that was a big influence in my life when I was growing up, and she, one of her favorite lines was from Edmund Burke, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Mm-hmm. And so she kind of inspired me. But when I got out of wrestling, and I had several incidents that happened to me, and so I had this idea of putting it into a book. I never considered myself a writer. I actually tried for several years to get other people to write it. I just couldn't find someone to do it. And one Saturday afternoon, I sat down at my computer, and before I got up, I had the first chapter and let my wife read it. She loved it, said keep going, and I did. My hope was to actually make it into a TV series. Michael Landon was a big influence on me. I used to love the Little House on the Prairie. Mm-hmm. You know, the pastor was a good man in that. Yeah. Charles was a great father. There was a great mother. The kids were well behaved. You had all the great moral things in life and those programs. Highway to Heaven was the same way.
Yeah.
And after Michael Landon died, nobody was doing that. Mm-hmm. And so I actually had the hopes that The Masked Saint would be made into another series that would bring back the kind of the memory of those great programs by Michael Landon. But it didn't work out that way. You know, the movie producer read the book and made it into a movie. But there's still a possibility that it might be made into a TV series. Still a possibility. So
that would be great. That would be excellent. We certainly need heroes, and we certainly need people defining good and evil. Now, how were you approached about making a movie for your book?
Actually, it started back in 2010. My sister gave a book to a lady at the school where she worked, and this lady was married to a movie producer. He had produced 3 blockbusters and lives in the Orlando area. And so my sister gave her the book. She read it and gave it to her husband. And her husband called me in and literally kept me on the leash for about a year with the possibilities of making it into a movie. And then the door slammed on that one. Then this producer from Canada flew down and met me at Disney World, and he was very interested, and the door kind of slammed on that one. And so I had given up because it just was adding stress to my life, and I put it on a shelf. And then in 2013, February of 2013, a Canadian producer called me and asked me if anybody had done anything with the book, and I said no. And 2 weeks later, he called me and said, we're going to make it into a movie. So that's how it happened. And lo and behold, later that year, it was filmed.
That's wonderful.
It is ready to go. I can't wait for January the 8th when it comes out.
Yeah. Now, the lead actor, I'm going to be interviewing him, Brett Grandstaff. He is also a producer, correct?
Yes. He's produced several movies. He's done, I think, a couple of Bruce Willis movies. He's acted in those movies, but I think he's also been an executive producer. And now he and his dad are both producers, and his dad is an executive producer on The Masked Saint.
Excellent. And have you seen the movie yet?
Oh, absolutely. I sure have.
Great. Well, I'm looking forward to it. Now, this is Roddy Piper's last movie. There's another great name. There's a guy who also had It. You know, I remember him in the Bay Area before his WWE days, and he played a great heel. Had you met him prior to the movie, and what are your thoughts of him?
Yeah, I actually worked on a show with him about 30 years before The Masked Saint, and had a picture that I brought to the movie just to see if he remembered, and he did. But Roddy Piper was just a super guy. I don't know if a lot of people know it or not, but when he wrestled, he had his wedding ring on. He always wrestled with his wedding ring on. He was a great father, 4 kids, and great husband, and just a great family man. And but boy, what a true, I don't know, I'm trying to think of the word. He was just one of the best in wrestling.
Yeah.
He was one of the best. He really was. And his ability, my goodness, I don't know how many movies he's made and TV series he's been in, but he was not only a good wrestler, he was a great actor.
Yes.
Great actor.
And, he always had time for fans. I met him one time, and he was just very graceful. What a great guy. Now, do you think that if I can round up enough people to go to this movie, do you think that there could be a sequel to The Masked Saint?
Oh, I absolutely do. I absolutely do. It's getting some great reviews. It won Best Picture at the International Christian Film Festival, which was quite an honor. I think there were about 400 movies entered in that festival, and it came out on top, Best Picture. So a lot of people that have already screened it love it, and I have heard from a couple of the producers that they'd love to see a sequel to it. So I'm hoping and praying that it happens.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say that I wholeheartedly think that if people want family-friendly pictures and family-friendly television shows, they ought to patronize them and support them. So I hope people get out there. I'm a wrestling fan and a Christian, so this is a no-brainer for me. But I hope people that love family-friendly pictures will go see The Masked Saint. Again, it's going to be released nationwide on January 8th, 2016. And as we get closer, if you find that it's not around you, call your theaters and ask them to play The Masked Saint at your nearby theater. You can also go on Facebook. The Masked Saint is on Facebook, and they're organizing people right now to get the word out in their local area to bring that movie to their city. Again, January 8th, 2016, The Masked Saint, and we've been speaking to the inspiration of The Masked Saint, the saint himself, Chris Whaley. Chris, this has been a real honor, and I hope you can come back sometime.
Man, Bruce, I would really love to do that. I thank you so much for your time and doing this interview about The Masked Saint. Would say that my book is being republished, and the book is going to come out at the same time the movie is. And I'm excited about that, too. But just thank you so much for doing this tonight.
Excellent. My honor. Thank you so much for joining us here at the Bruce Collins Show, where you can find us every Friday night at midnight here at WWPR 1490 AM. Remember, God loves you. We do too. Don't give up.